welcome to Pediatric Grand Rounds. It is a pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning. Dr. Whitney Rolling is currently a third-year resident in pediatrics here at Stanford. She graduated magna cum laude in biochemistry and molecular sciences from the University of Minnesota in Duluth, where she was the outstanding student in first-year biology. She received a freshman award for excellence in general chemistry. She was on the all-academic team in both cross-country and track and field. She was on the Dean's List for 6 semesters, received the Miles Brand Award as an all-academic with distinction. She was the outstanding student in biology and microbiology. She went on to receive her medical degree from the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, where she was a member of the Kirksville chapter of the Gold Humanitarian Society. She is co-author of an article published in Pediatrics in Review and is currently serving on the Patient Experience Committee. The topic this morning is Update in Teen Recreational Drug Use, Uncovering the Juul. Please welcome Dr. Whitney Rolling.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for that nice introduction, Dr. Maher. So yeah, again, my name is Dr. Whitney Rolling. I'm one of the third-year pediatric residents, and it's my pleasure to present my grand rounds on updates in teen recreational drug use, uncovering the Juul. So disclosures, I have no financial disclosures. So our objectives this morning are to summarize current recreational drug use and their use in adolescents, to discuss health risks associated with vaping and electronic cigarettes, and to review some current research in these areas, and to also help everyone locate some useful resources for physicians and their patients. So I just wanted to talk about why I chose this topic. A couple months ago, so as residents, we're always required to do a half day of continuity clinic every week. And a couple months ago, one of our attendings said, hey, you know, you need to start learning about the Juul. And I'm like, what is that? I've never heard of that before. So I kind of took this opportunity to do my own research so I could present some information for you guys and hopefully just make you more aware of it and feel more comfortable about talking about it with your patients. I also thought it was really interesting because I brought this topic up to my mother, and she actually had her own experience with, my grandma passed away in late August, and she had a nursing assistant that had forgotten her sweatshirt, and my mom was returning her sweatshirt and something fell out of the pocket of the nursing assistant's sweatshirt, and my mom didn't know what it was. So she did some research and found that it was a vaping type device. So she felt a little relieved because she didn't know if that nursing assistant was maybe on illicit drugs or something. So that was very reassuring for her. So I thought that was kind of ironic how we both had some kind of curiosity about this topic. So I just wanted to begin on kind of teaching you a little bit about the prevalence of vaping. One way to look at how common different behaviors are in adolescents is looking at something called the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance. So it's a school-based survey that is conducted by the CDC. It has been done since 1991, and it's done every other year. Survey topics include injuries, violence, sexual behaviors, alcohol use, drug use, dietary behaviors, and exercise. And you can also find prevalence data on obesity, asthma, sexual identity, and sexual activity. So all these questions are more based on morbidity and mortality for adolescents, so learning more about that. The targeted group is 9th through 12th graders, and these are self-administered surveys. These schools that conduct the surveys are given funds to do so, and I was going to go over some data to give you a general idea of how prevalent vaping is. So the last year that it was conducted was in 2017, and 14,765 usable surveys were collected. I know that number doesn't seem like a whole lot. Oh, and I apologize. Let me know if I'm forgetting to forward. So it seems kind of like a small number for a nationwide survey, but they actually do a 3-stage cluster sample, so they try to get representative samples from the different states. And if you can, I don't know if you can see on the map because it's a little smaller, but the only states, some of the states that didn't participate were Minnesota and South Dakota, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon, and then Ohio, Indiana, New Jersey, and then some of the southern states. But overall, a good number of states did participate. Looking at the data for ever used an electronic vaping device. So this was kind of a surprising number. So the 9th through 12th graders that were surveyed said that they said at least 42.2% of them have actually tried vaping, compared to 28.9% that have tried cigarettes. So that was kind of surprising. So it's almost, not quite, about 50% of some of the adolescents that we see have likely tried vaping. Other statistics I wanted to go over are how often these adolescents are using these products. So current electronic vapor product use was defined as using the product at least one day in the previous 30 days. So it calculated out to 13.2% of those adolescents were using or had current vaping that they participated in. And just kind of comparing that to cigarette smoking, 8.8% had said they used it in at least one of the days in the last 30 days. Current frequent electronic vapor product use was defined as using a vaping product within the last, or I guess in at least 20 of the 30 previous days before the surveys were conducted, and that was 3.3% of those adolescents compared to 2.6% in the adolescents that were cigarette smokers. And then the current daily electronic vapor product use was 2.4% compared to 2% in daily cigarette smokers. So I think pretty surprising numbers. So, and just going over a trend, there was surveys conducted by the FDA and CDC that said there was over a 900% increase from 2011 to 2016 regarding current e-cigarette use. And I just kind of think that's an interesting number to think about, because I know, at least in the medical field, you always think about the big problems for each generation. I know past generations was, smoking, combustible cigarettes, and then I've heard our generation is working on obesity, and I'm wondering maybe this will be another problem that maybe this generation or the next will have to try to work on. So just to go over a little bit of government things regarding vaping and electronic cigarettes. So e-cigarettes, or ENDS, electronic nicotine delivery systems, fall into the category of tobacco products effective May 2016. Nicotine is a substance derived from tobacco, so thus nicotine-containing products become categorized into regulation by the FDA under tobacco products. So with this new regulation, tobacco products can't be sold to anyone under 18, and then you're not supposed to have vending machines with these products. They have actually been available to buy since 2007, which I thought was really surprising, because I feel like I've only started to hear about it within the last couple of years. And electronic cigarettes are not an approved method for smoking cessation by the U.S. Preventative Task Force. Advertising may say otherwise. I'm going to show this video at the very end, so I'm going to skip this slide. So I know there's a lot of words on this page, but I just kind of wanted to go over what the FDA has been kind of working on most recently regarding vaping and electronic cigarette use. So their goals are to prevent youth access to tobacco products, which I kind of talked about before, where it's supposedly illegal to sell to minors. And then they want to also start decreasing marketing for tobacco products, especially when the second bullet, especially with having products that look like cereals or candy and having them advertised based on their flavoring. The FDA has issued, and this was back in September, I guess just a couple months ago, or a couple weeks ago, I should say. The FDA has issued warning letters to companies and are doing fines to some companies that that are illegally selling to children and adolescents. And even in the spring, they were targeting the Juul company, and they issued 56 warning letters to these companies to start changing the way that they're selling their products. So I know you guys can't read these on here, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that there's different federal and then kind of local government agencies regarding what the selling is of these products. So I know you can't read them, but there's different cities that are listed on this PDF that actually ban the use of flavored tobacco products, which I think was really cool and interesting. So it was just neat to compare and actually see different cities that have banned flavored electronic cigarettes and their e-juices, which I'll go over in a little bit. So availability, I just wanted to quick kind of give you guys a general idea of how accessible some of these products are. So I did like a Google search of one particular product called the Juul, and I don't know if you can see on the map, but the orange dot, it would be the hospital here. And I just wanted to see how many places that someone could potentially buy a Juul per se. There's 26 stores that carry the Juul within the 5-mile radius of the hospital, and these products are available at gas stations. And then the other bigger picture of the map is just certain vaping shops that people can go to buy some of these products. All right, now that I've used all these some of these terms, what am I talking about really? So I wanted to go over kind of the devices so you guys are more familiar what you might be seeing or hearing about. So vaping devices, they're also known as e-cigarettes, e-cigs, ENDS, which are electronic nicotine delivery systems, vape pens, mods, tank systems. This is like a little graphic that I got from an actual vaping website that kind of describes the different vaping equipment per se. The one on your very left was what they call the first generation e-cigarettes. These were ones that actually look like a cigarette, and they were just kind of known for just poor battery life, and some of these were disposable, so the very first generation ones. And as you move from left to right, you get more sophisticated systems that have better battery life. And the one on the far left, it actually is a type of device that you can customize how you vape these substances. And when I was reading about them, I started reading about physics terms like ohms and resistance, and then I kind of backed away from that because it was giving me flashbacks from calculus-based physics. But it was kind of interesting because some of these more sophisticated products, people can actually customize how they're vaping their e-liquids. And there's also more customizable devices that people can make their own coils, and I'll kind of go over that in just a second too. So yeah, very interesting, I thought. And just here's another picture of kind of depictions of your kind of first generation cig-alikes, your second generation pens, which are known for their more longer lasting battery, larger capacity for the e-juices, and then the third generations, which are your more customizable vaping systems. Here's another picture of the actual devices. So you see more of the e-cigarettes on your left again, and then some of your more sophisticated devices in the middle. Your e-cigar, which to me looks like same as a cigar, so I would not know the difference, like I guess looking at the product. And then there's also e-pipes. And then in the middle I had labeled the Juul, which is another type of vaping device. This one in particular is kind of, as I talked about in the beginning of this presentation, one that is pretty popular with adolescents. It looks like a USB drive, and it tends to be, what's the word? It can be hidden more easily because it's a smaller device and doesn't really have the big like vaping clouds that maybe some of these other devices have. And just some of the differences too is the Juul itself, you need actual cartridges or what they call little pods to buy from the actual company to vape. While some of the other products have these little chambers that you fill with your e-juices that you buy. Here's one more picture kind of categorizing the different products. So just going over the mechanism really quickly about how vaping actually works. So there's actually something called an atomizer that's activated either by inhalation, or you can like manually switch on a button, and inside this atomizer is a heating coil that heats the liquid, and then the liquid produces a vapor that's inhaled and then blown out. Another form of vaping is something called dripping. So this is, as opposed to having the actual device, having the coil system that can help regulate how much e-liquid is vaporized. Dripping is a type of vaping that the consumer will buy their e-liquid and manually drip onto the heating element of the product. Dripping tends to be popular because it can produce a more pungent kind of vaping experience per se. Unfortunately, this can also be a more harmful way to vape because it can have a more dense vapor cloud of all the chemicals in the vapor, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. It tends to be also popular because this method of vaping, you can technically switch flavors. So if you have your little e-juice, you can drip onto the coils whatever amount you want to vape, and then after so many puffs, you can switch to a different flavor. Unlike maybe the traditional way to vape, which you'd probably use the whole container first before changing over to a different liquid. Here's just a picture. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting. My apologies. There we go. Here's a picture of some of the e-juices. So you can see those little, they almost look like eyedropper containers. You see those little, they're called e-juices, e-liquids, and then you have like more of the pods or little cartridges for the Juul device. What's really interesting is for the e-juices, what's really popular with adolescents is the actual flavoring. So there's multiple flavors that can be bought, including tobacco, menthol, and then banana. As you can, you probably can't read it. I don't know if you can read the flavors from there, but pretty much anything under the sun. And then you can also get the cartridges, and those are the flavors available to the Juul consumers: Virginia tobacco, mint, mango, cucumber, menthol, fruit, creme, I don't know, and then classic tobacco. And what's interesting, so the Juul pods, I believe those all contain nicotine, and you can't really see the percentages, but for those products you can get 3 to 5% of nicotine in those products. And then the e-juices, they can either have nicotine and some don't. So it's important, as I'll kind of talk about later, to know, or at least for adolescents or the consumers, to know exactly if you're vaping products that have nicotine. And one other thing I wanted to add is vaping devices can also be used as a drug delivery system for other drugs like marijuana. All right, so the big parts that I really wanted to highlight were the health risks associated with vaping that I feel like is important to know if adolescents have questions and just for education and like the general clinic. So some of the direct risks that I wanted to go over include nicotine addiction, inhalation exposures, risk for pulmonary disorders and battery injuries, including overheating and explosions. And then some of the indirect risks I wanted to talk about were nicotine and brain development, nicotine overdoses or accidental overdoses, and then introduction by using vaping devices with nicotine. It's an introduction to some of our tobacco products and potentially other drugs. Excuse me. So starting with nicotine addiction, so 1 Juul cartridge, those little teeny ones, have as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. So 1 Juul cartridge contains about 200 puffs, and so 1 cigarette is 10 puffs, and then a pack of cigarettes is 20. So essentially you're getting about, so if you have a cartridge, it's equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. And granted, with the e-juices, it might be different since some do not have nicotine and some do. And that can also kind of vary because there's different amounts of nicotine in the different products. So nicotine acts as both a stimulant and depressant. So one reason why at least smoking traditional cigarettes years ago and probably still today is it decreases your metabolism, or it increases your metabolism, and also decreases your appetite, so it helps with like weight reduction. And then the half-life of nicotine is 2 to 3 hours, so it goes through your system pretty quickly, so that's why you have our smokers that need multiple smoke breaks during the day because they need that multiple exposures to the nicotine. All right, so I don't know. Oh, good. Maybe you guys can see that. It just looks different in the back. So just a couple things about nicotine addiction and this is a really simple graph, but I think it goes over some important things. So of course, there's different factors affecting susceptibility to nicotine: age, genetics, and of course the environment that you're in and what kind of influence you have from your peers. But so you have the smoking behavior, which you breathe in, at least in vaping or e-cigarette use, you breathe in the nicotine, it goes into your lungs and it kind of goes into your blood system and then goes into your brain. So it does release neurotransmitters such as dopamine, which gives you that feeling of relief, and it gives you like a happier, good feeling. And then smoking and or vaping also can affect your mood. So that's why when you see smokers, for example, trying to quit, they're sometimes very moody. And then also what I talked about before is helps maybe decrease your weight. And then it can kind of be used as a self-medication. So you can also kind of start to get a reduced tolerance to nicotine and need more of it to get those same effects. So I kind of going to my next point on what are in these e-juices that you're putting in these devices. So the NIH did a survey. And they asked teens what are in their e-cigarettes or in their e-juices. The majority of them said, so 66% had said, oh, it's just flavoring. 13.7% said they actually don't know what they're vaping. 13.2% actually said, yes, there is nicotine in our e-juices or cartridges. And then 5.8% did say they were vaping marijuana. This is like a little ad that I found online from Tobacco Free California that I thought was really interesting. So it just, as you guys can read, it says e-cigarette aerosol contains at least 10 chemicals that are known to cause cancer, birth defects, and then they list some of them on the side there. I know this is another graphic that I thought was really interesting. It's a little hard to see maybe, but just kind of goes over like just subdividing kind of what's in some of these aerosols or vapor. It has volatile organic compounds, nicotine, ultrafine particles, cancer-causing chemicals, heavy metals, and flavoring that are known to cause serious lung disease. So this is a really generalized slide, but I just try to look online exactly what case studies have popped up for, unfortunately, maybe what happened to some people after they started e-cigarette or vaping. And of course, this doesn't happen to everyone, but there has been case reports of acute alveolitis with intra-alveolar fibrosis, hypersensitivity pneumonitis, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and these are all caused by electronic cigarettes. Components of e-cigarettes, like I mentioned briefly in the previous slide, can contain certain particles because heating of the metal coil multiple times can emit some of these metals, and then the wick itself can also potentially contaminate the aerosol. So these can potentially cause transient toxicity, predispose people to respiratory infections, potentially cause cancer, but further research is indicated just because a lot of these vaping and e-juices are so new. And like I mentioned before, components of these aerosols include some flavorings that are known to cause lung disorders such as bronchiolitis, obliterans, and granulomatous lung disease. And it was just really interesting reading about this too, because different flavors per se can have different effects on the inflammatory processes of the lung. I remember reading a lot about like the cinnamon flavored ones can be really irritating. And here's a little graphic that I thought was really interesting that kind of depicted the different areas that vaping can affect the lung. So research has found that it decreases exhaled nitric oxide. It can have cytotoxicity, increased lung weight, airway hyperreactivity. It can downregulate host defenses. And then there's, like we talked about before, like with the high levels of particle deposition, either from the coils or what's in the e-juices themselves. So a lot of different areas of the lung, or I guess different pathways that it can affect the lung. So the other thing I wanted to go over for the electronic nicotine devices are battery injuries. So another danger of e-cigarettes are these battery-associated injuries. These injuries include actual explosions and then accidental ignition in pockets and that kind of thing. Burns can be thermal, chemical, or electrical. And then unfortunately explosions have been documented in consumers' pockets or actually during inhalation. So you can kind of imagine the damage that it can do to the consumer. So whoops, there we go. So I pulled up the CNN report that was about this unfortunate man that had died from an e-cigarette explosion. It said that his cause of death was identified as a projectile wound to the head, and it was a section of the e-cigarette, which was really surprising to me. And the article had also said that according to the U.S. Fire Administration, from 2009 to 2016, 195 separate e-cigarette fires and explosion incidents were reported in the U.S. So what they suggested in this article was always use the charger that came with the device and make sure that the battery has a shut-off and try not to overcharge the battery. So doing some of these things can cause the battery to malfunction. And of course replacing batteries if they get damaged or wet. I was just thinking to myself how many computer batteries I've gone through because I've overcharged them overnight and that kind of thing. So I can't even imagine, something that you actually hold up to your face and having a battery that malfunctions. I just wanted to briefly go over nicotine and brain development. So I think this slide is mostly from the U.S. Surgeon General, just kind of discussing how nicotine can affect brain development. So it's found to adversely affect impulse control, mood, attention, and learning in adolescent brains. And then developing brains on nicotine react differently to different drugs. So even other drugs can be more addicting to adolescents that have been on nicotine nicotine products. So I thought that was really interesting because, of course, your adolescents are still forming their frontal lobe, and I can't even imagine throwing nicotine in there as well. So the other danger with e-liquids and these vaping products are nicotine overdose. So on the Poison Control website, they started to get calls on electronic cigarettes and e-liquid or liquids with nicotine starting in about 2011. This graph below shows the number of incidences reported in each year. So in 2000, I guess it doesn't start in 2011, but in 2013 they had about 1,500 incidences. The next year they had over 4,000, and then this year to date they had 2,226. And exposures to these e-liquids with nicotine can include ingestion, inhalation, or topical exposure. So when I talked about like the dripping earlier, it can predispose people to more of the topical exposures if they per se drip some of this liquid onto their hands or that kind of thing. And here's just some of the symptoms of nicotine overdose. Mild symptoms are nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and then severe symptoms can be seizures, cardiac rhythm abnormalities, and hypotension, which can lead to death. And then you guys won't be able to read this, so I was going to read it to you. So I tried to find different examples, unfortunately, of the dangers of ingestion for nicotine. The two smaller ones on your left are actually adult cases. The first case on the top was the death of a 32-year-old male who actually ingested an e-liquid while he was under the influence of alcohol. And then the one below that was a 24-year-old woman who intentionally ingested the e-liquid and passed away. And she had, it says, aggressive supportive care, and she was found to have multiple acute infarcts consistent with severe anoxic brain injury. And then the other article is from healthychildrens.org, so it's one of the websites that the American Academy of Pediatrics puts up. So they even kind of put a little article on the dangers for kiddos, because some of these products, like we've talked about before, look like they'd be candy or look like certain cereals, or it's banana, that kind of thing. And the e-liquids themselves don't have like a regulation for child safety, so some of these e-liquids are, obviously very dangerous, and nicotine is so concentrated in these liquids that they are very dangerous to kiddos. So healthychildren.org actually highlighted, they had reported that in 2014, a 1-year-old child had died from liquid nicotine poisoning, the first death in the United States. So, very sad, and just a good thing to know, kind of a potential new hazard that we should start to be watching for and even maybe talking about at visits. And then talking about kind of the gateway, and granted, kind of my perception, but per se the thinking of vaping as a potential like gateway behavior for tobacco products. So this was a little graph, the same as the one before that had the pie chart. This is from like the same people. They had looked at how many e-cigarette users are more likely to start smoking. So within the first 6 months, e-cigarette users were 30.7% of them had started smoking compared to 8.1% that were non-smokers. So that was, I think, pretty interesting. And kind of like what I talked about before, or just talked about in the last slide. So research has been showing that e-cigarette use among teens increases their likelihood of smoking and using other drugs. And then I just wanted to go over really quick too that, of course, whenever you're talking to adolescents and children, it's always good to screen for mental health disorders, especially anxiety and depression, because it can be some of these products can be self-medicating. So it's always good that if an adolescent discloses to you that they're a consumer of legal or illicit drugs, it would be a good idea to just ask some of those other questions in regards to mental health. So my last couple slides are regarding some resources. So the ones I really liked were, one of the resources was from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it has a nice website with a lot of links that you can look at about e-cigarettes and vaping. Here's the website from the Surgeon General, and then there's a really cool report from the Surgeon General that has a really nice summary about e-cigarettes and vaping. And then, of course, the CDC is always a great place too, that they have a lot of nice resources. Another resource is the FDA, so it's kind of interesting to look at the regulations on who can buy these products, kind of like we talked about before, and the actual regulations on sellers. And then I think I have my resource slide, which you can't read because I use a lot of like little resources. And then I just included a picture. It doesn't have anything to do with vaping. So part of a couple weeks ago, we were able to, Kathy Rolling, who's our program coordinator, she invited all the pediatric residents to go to her and her husband's farm to learn about pediatric farm injuries. So we were lucky enough to have a helicopter come land on one of her fields, and everyone got to go up and sit in the helicopter. So everyone, you can see my boys too, were super excited about that. So it's always just really cool that our residency program gives us different opportunities to learn about, different injuries, diseases, that kind of thing that are important to our youth these days. And that's kind of another reason why I just wanted to do this topic. And then I had a video that I was going to play. It's kind of a summary of my presentation in 2 minutes, but it's kind of nice because it has the perspective of school administrators and what they're kind of seeing in schools, because I didn't really go over that. So I thought that'd be kind of interesting to see. I don't know if anyone's up there to help. I can run up and do it too. Oh, okay. Let me go do it, please. Hold on one second.
High school principal Frances Thompson is desperately trying to snuff out a problem that teachers are having all across the country.
They would come in here, you'd have 4 or 5 kids at a time congregating, and they'd start to vape.
It's a trend that many parents are not even aware of. But e-cigarette use, or vaping, has grown an astonishing 900% among high school students in recent years, according to the Surgeon General. In a 2016 National Youth Tobacco Survey, found nearly 1.7 million high school students and 500,000 middle schoolers had used e-cigarettes in just the 30-day period before the survey was taken. In Rentham, Massachusetts, Assistant Vice Principal Spencer Christie says he too is overwhelmed by this new and pervasive epidemic.
Our Juul pods. Now it's moved to students vaping in hallways, vaping in classrooms.
In the back, 2 desks in the corner, they had their hands kind of up like this. and there was a blue light coming from between their hands.
The most popular item, which is the Juul, and as you can see, it looks like a flash drive. It's not. And then the kids can just tuck it away when they're done. So
It's not just the design of these products. Critics say all these flavors also entice kids to start vaping. One study out of Harvard found some of these artificial flavors contain diacetyl. That's a chemical linked to severe respiratory disease.
the kids that I talk to believe that there is nothing in there that's dangerous. They don't think there's anything more than water.
It's not water. It's called e-liquid. And when heated by the coil, it changes to an aerosol. Columbia University researchers using this machine found the vapor has toxic metals like chromium, nickel, zinc, and lead. And as we know, there is no safe level of lead. With very little regulation, people are not fully aware of what they're consuming. I sat down with the FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, and asked him about this e-cig phenomenon.
Youth use is deeply concerning to me. We're going to be taking some enforcement actions very soon to target companies that we think are marketing products in ways that they're deliberately appealing to kids. I'm going to be having conversations with some of these companies, trying to inspire them, if I can, to take more corrective actions on their own.
Don't forget, nicotine is one of the most addictive substances out there.
I think it's the next epidemic among teenagers.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN, reporting.
I think if someone had their choice of cigarettes or an e-cigarette, obviously e-cigarettes I think would be safer. But
Right. Well, thank you for letting me present on this topic today. So I hope it kind of gives you a better general idea, so you can maybe talk to your patients if they have questions or just for your general knowledge. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I guess this is time to see if there's any questions.
What did you find on secondhand, like exposure? So is it this? I'm assuming it's the same risk. And then, I guess my other question too is, I mean, I always just ask, does anybody smoke in the home? But I suppose we need to start rewording that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good question, Dr. Larson. So I didn't personally research a lot of like the secondhand, but I guess my assumption is you'd get similar exposures if they are nearby, and I'm not sure how like far the aerosol or the particles or some of the other things would be close, how close you would need to be in inhale those. So I can't really answer that question, but yeah, absolutely. For your second question, I think it is really important to watch your vocabulary, because sometimes adolescents are very strict with how they see things. So smoking is not the same as vaping, but for us it might, at least for me, before I kind of did this topic, it was kind of the same, or at least I didn't know it well enough to ask. But yeah, I think it is important to actually use the language of vaping or e-cigarettes or something to that effect. So that's a really good point. A lot of, at least for our some of our screening at the clinic, it talks about like maybe smoking and tobacco, but yeah, it's not updated enough to actually ask about vaping. So thank you. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so they're required on the bottles to say the nicotine content. And I was trying to look at that a little bit before I presented on it, because some, like I said, have nicotine. On the bottles, it'll actually say how much nicotine is per milliliter, so it'll be something like, anywhere from 0 to, I think, up to like 30 milligrams, if I'm saying that right, per milliliter. So it should say on it, and it should have like a big comment that said like, this is a nicotine containing product. And then the little Juul cartridges, they're like 3 to 5%, which is about, I think it was like 23 milligrams to like 40 or so. And then I was trying to look up the toxicity of nicotine. There's kind of varied ideas on it, and at least what I found, if I'm remembering the units correctly, were anywhere from like, some people will say like 60 milligrams for an adult up to like 1,000 would potentially be deadly. So even like, maybe even like one of those juice or e-juices or something could potentially be very hazardous to children and adults. It should be, to my understanding. Good question.
So you had mentioned possible alternate routes of administration, like accidental ingestion or like possible transdermal transmission. Have you found any trends, like kids trying things, an alternate administration, like sublingual or anything like that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I actually didn't see anything about that. Yeah, I haven't read anything about that, but yeah, that would be very interesting. I know I talked about the dripping, which is more of like concentrated forms of the e-liquid, but I actually haven't seen any data on experimentation like with direct administration of the e-liquid. But that's a good question. Yes, that's a good question too. So I'm not. I looked it up a long time ago, and no, I can't remember. But I think it's fairly comparable. Yeah, I can't give you the exact numbers, but I think it's fairly comparable. Maybe a little bit more expensive, and it depends on some of the devices. Like those more, sophisticated devices are going to be more expensive.
Whitney, how are these devices taxed? There's a new initiated measure to increase the tax on cigarettes by $1 per pack, and I guess would something like that kind of shift kids from smoking cigarettes to vaping, or are these taxed like cigarettes are taxed?
Yes, that is a very good question. I don't think I can answer that. I started reading on that as well, but I didn't read deep enough into it. I know at least, this doesn't answer your question, but at least from the FDA, they have warned companies that the FDA will actually start banning flavored e-juices, which would definitely, decrease adolescent use just because it won't be available. So sorry I wasn't able to answer tax. That's a fantastic question.
But if they ban the flavored ones, would that promote using the
Right, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I know at least for some of the cities that had banned some of the flavored tobacco products or the nicotine-containing products, some will still allow like the tobacco flavor or the menthol flavor. So yeah, it'd be a huge hit on the sellers of the e-liquids because I believe most of them are flavored. So good question.
So this really isn't a question, but I just thought this was interesting. So my source is Facebook, which obviously isn't the best, but last night I actually saw a post about a teenager who the school was trying to take away what they thought was a e-cig device, and it actually was her insulin pen.
Oh.
And so just something to keep in mind. They do look a lot alike.
Absolutely. I asked my aunt. So my aunt works in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So I asked her what her experiences were with the vaping. I know for the video, rats, did they say they were in Massachusetts? No, I can't remember. So she's in St. Cloud, and at least from her perspective, like they don't have it in the schools. They don't have that problem. So I'm sure it just kind of depends on administration in the schools and that kind of thing. I'm not sure what it looks like around here, and that's just St. Cloud, Minnesota. So, yeah.
In the cities that have banned the flavored juices, have there been any studies to look at the rates of e-cigarette use in teenagers in comparison to other cities that don't have that ban?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure the answer. That's a really good question.
So I found an answer to the tax question.
There you go. Thanks. Oh,
States.
Brian, you're awesome. He's a Wednesday clinic guy like me, so.
California, Nebraska, Minnesota, Louisiana, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and then Alaska, Illinois, and Maryland have municipal areas. But some people are starting, but there's nothing federally regulated that says, yeah, we have to excise a vape tax or anything like that.
Thanks, Brian.
A place where like somebody's vaping inside.
Yeah.
But you can't smoke in a restaurant. So is there any law
Right.
that you saw that?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be around that as much as I don't want to.
Hey, absolutely. Yeah. That's a really good question. I'm not as sure about the exact laws. I think it would probably depend on the actual facilities. But yeah. And yeah, they're more discreet than, smoking tobacco and that smell and flavor or smell. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Dr. Wynot, I'll repeat. Oh, you have a microphone. Okay.
I was just going to say this is just anecdotal, but over the summer we get stories all the time from kids and families as we talk about these things. And I have probably half a dozen families that are teachers or principals, and they do comment when I bring this up and talk about it. They, oh my gosh, it's a problem here too. Mm-hmm. I've had kids tell me that they've seen kids in the bathrooms doing it, waiting for the bus doing it, like she described, even in class. I think there's a thrill factor in it. What can I get away with?
Absolutely. Thank you. Very interesting. Any other questions or comments? I don't want to keep you guys here too long because I know you have things to do. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Have a nice day.